The galaxy had already decided humanity's fate long before the first shot was ever fired. Across a civilization spanning millions of stars, a single announcement echoed through colossal Senate chambers, orbital cities, mining colonies buried inside dying moons, and glittering capitals suspended above gas giants. Every transmission tower, every quantum relay, every military command station carried the same message with chilling precision. The Galactic Council had declared total war on Earth. It was a sentence that had erased entire civilizations throughout recorded history. Empires far older than Earth's oceans had fallen after hearing those words. Species that once ruled clusters of galaxies had vanished into forgotten ruins because the Council had never lost a war. Their judgments were absolute. Their fleets were unstoppable. Their enemies became history. Deep within the Council's immense hall of judgment, silence settled like a physical weight after the proclamation. The chamber itself was a monument to conquest, a circular cathedral carved from the core of a dead star, its towering walls lined with banners representing thousands of worlds that had surrendered over countless millennia. Floating holographic maps displayed the Sol system in brilliant crimson, surrounded by expanding rings of invasion routes. Hundreds of alien delegates watched in grim satisfaction while military strategists calmly discussed timetables, casualty projections, and planetary occupation plans as though Earth's destruction were nothing more than another administrative procedure. No one questioned the outcome. They debated only how long humanity would resist before pleading for mercy. Beyond the chamber, reality itself seemed to respond. Across the galaxy, colossal war fleets awakened from centuries of dormancy. Engines the size of continents ignited with thunderous flashes of blue-white plasma. Endless formations of black warships emerged from hidden shipyards drifting inside nebulae, their armored hulls swallowing the light of nearby stars. Carrier vessels released swarms of autonomous fighters that stretched across space like metallic storms, while massive dreadnoughts slowly aligned toward a single destination. The synchronized activation of millions of vessels sent ripples through hyperspace, creating shimmering distortions visible even to civilian observatories thousands of light-years away. Entire constellations appeared to move. To countless observers, it looked as though the galaxy itself had begun marching toward Earth. Every historian knew what came next. Every analyst predicted the same ending. Humanity would fight with desperate courage, lose spectacularly, and become another tragic footnote in the Council's endless archive of conquered civilizations. News networks across neutral systems interrupted regular broadcasts to cover the approaching invasion. Markets collapsed. Refugee routes filled with terrified travelers fleeing any region remotely close to human territory. Parents pulled frightened children closer as commentators spoke in hushed voices about the extinction of Earth's young civilization. Some pitied the humans. Others mocked them. Most simply accepted the inevitable. Then, just as celebration began spreading through the Council's command network, every military frequency in the known galaxy suddenly went silent. Not jammed. Not interrupted. Silenced. Every screen flickered once. Navigation displays froze. Fleet commanders frowned in confusion as encrypted channels they believed impossible to penetrate displayed an unfamiliar blue symbol, a simple human emblem glowing against a field of darkness. A single voice followed. Calm. Steady. Almost amused. There was no fear hiding beneath the words. No desperation. No anger. Only quiet confidence, as though the speaker had been expecting this moment for years. The transmission lasted less than 2 seconds. Is that all? Nothing more. No threats. No negotiations. No explanation. Yet somehow, those 4 ordinary words struck harder than any weapon ever forged. Across countless bridges, veteran admirals stopped breathing. Council delegates exchanged uncertain glances for the first time in centuries. A chill spread through command centers separated by millions of light-years. Because civilizations facing extinction did not sound like that. Only civilizations that already knew something their enemies did not. Earth had never claimed to be the greatest power among the stars. It possessed no ancient relics left behind by forgotten gods, no fleets that stretched endlessly across the galaxy, and no empire built upon the ruins of conquered civilizations. Compared to the mighty members of the Galaxy Council, humanity was still considered a newcomer, a young species that had reached the stars through stubborn persistence rather than overwhelming superiority. Yet that misunderstanding had become humanity's greatest advantage. While alien governments measured strength by the number of warships they possessed, humans measured it by something far more dangerous, the ability to adapt faster than anyone expected. Commander Elena Hayes stood motionless on the panoramic bridge of the battleship Resolute, watching Earth rotate beneath her through the crystal observation wall. The planet glowed like a sapphire wrapped in ribbons of white cloud, peaceful from a distance, almost fragile against the endless darkness of space. Sunlight reflected from thousands of orbital habitats that circled the world like shimmering pearls. Cargo vessels drifted between lunar shipyards, scientific platforms floated silently beyond geostationary orbit, and civilian transports crossed carefully maintained traffic lanes with practiced precision. To any foreign observer, Earth appeared exactly as it wished to appear, a thriving civilization devoted to science, commerce, diplomacy, and exploration. It was a carefully crafted illusion. Elena had helped build that illusion for nearly 20 years. Every communications satellite carried encrypted military intelligence hidden beneath civilian protocols. Every asteroid mining station secretly manufactured components that never appeared in trade records. The elegant solar collectors surrounding Mercury doubled as immense energy reservoirs capable of powering weapons that had never been publicly acknowledged. Even the peaceful orbital habitats housed emergency command centers buried beneath kilometers of reinforced alloy. Humanity had spent decades convincing the galaxy that it feared war. In truth, it had simply been preparing for it. Soft amber lights illuminated the bridge as officers worked quietly at their stations. No one shouted. No one panicked. The atmosphere carried the calm precision of people who had rehearsed this exact moment thousands of times. Holographic tactical displays floated above polished command consoles, projecting thousands of red markers as Council fleets advanced through neighboring sectors. Every minute, another hostile armada crossed into human-controlled space. Elena folded her hands behind her back, hiding the slight tremor in her fingers. She wasn't fearless. No human truly was. She had family living on Earth below, parents who still refused to leave their coastal home despite evacuation orders, a younger brother commanding a defense squadron near Jupiter, and millions of civilians trusting soldiers like her to survive what history insisted could not be survived. The weight of those lives settled heavily on her shoulders. But fear had always been humanity's oldest companion. It had crossed oceans despite fear. It had walked on the moon despite fear. It had reached distant stars despite fear. Fear was never the enemy. Surrender was. A soft chime echoed across the bridge. The ship's tactical intelligence projected a rotating image of the approaching invasion. Thousands of enemy signatures multiplied into hundreds of thousands. New hyperspace ruptures blossomed across the map like spreading fractures in glass. Each represented another Council fleet joining the offensive. An officer looked toward Elena, waiting for orders. She remained silent for several long seconds. Instead of studying the enemy formations, her eyes drifted toward the quiet blue world beneath the ship. Cities glittered across Earth's night side like constellations brought to the surface. Children were sleeping. Scientists were still working inside research towers. Farmers were harvesting crops under artificial moons. Ordinary people continued living ordinary lives because they believed someone was standing between them and the darkness. That realization steadied her heartbeat. A faint smile appeared. "They still think we're preparing to defend Earth," she said quietly. Several officers exchanged knowing glances. None corrected her. Because every person aboard the Resolute understood the truth. Humanity had never intended to fight a defensive war. The Council believed it was marching toward an unprepared civilization. In reality, it was walking exactly where humanity had spent generations guiding it. As warning sirens finally echoed through the battleship and the first hostile fleets crossed the outer edge of the solar system, Elena placed her hand upon the command console and gave the order everyone had been waiting decades to hear. It's finally time. Across human space, ancient contingency protocols awakened. And the trap began to close. The first wave arrived without mercy. Across the outer edge of the solar system, space itself tore open as thousands of hyperspace fractures ignited simultaneously, flooding the darkness with violent ribbons of blue and crimson light. One by one, then by the tens of thousands, the Galaxy Council's warships emerged from the shimmering void. Colossal dreadnoughts stretched for dozens of kilometers, their obsidian hulls covered in glowing weapon arrays powerful enough to reduce planets to molten ruins. Carrier fortresses released endless swarms of autonomous fighters that spread through the vacuum like clouds of metallic insects, while gravity cruisers distorted the starlight around them, making entire fleets appear as moving shadows against the sun. Sensors aboard every human outpost screamed the same impossible conclusion: the largest military force ever assembled had finally reached Earth. Inside the Resolute, the bridge lights dimmed automatically as tactical projections filled the room. Holographic maps layered over one another until they resembled an ocean of crimson. Every red icon represented an enemy vessel. Every expanding circle marked another hyperspace rupture. The numbers climbed so rapidly that even the artificial intelligence paused briefly before recalculating the scale of the invasion. Officers exchanged silent glances. There were simply too many targets to count. Confirmed visual, the tactical officer whispered. Another voice answered almost immediately. Additional fleets entering from the galactic north. A third. Southern approach compromised. Then a fourth. They're surrounding the entire system. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The silence felt heavier than any explosion. Commander Elena Hayes stared at the projection without blinking. Every instinct born from decades of military service told her the same brutal truth. No defense doctrine in recorded history could survive such overwhelming force. The Council hadn't come merely to defeat humanity. It had come to erase the idea that resistance was ever possible. Far below, life continued on Earth. Morning sunlight spilled across mountain ranges and glittered against endless oceans. High-speed trains crossed continents. Children hurried toward schools, laughing beneath skies so peaceful they gave no hint that millions of warships now waited beyond the orbit of Neptune. Families gathered around breakfast tables while emergency broadcasts played softly in the background. Some listened with quiet fear. Others refused to believe the invasion would truly come. Yet across every city, every colony, every settlement scattered through the solar system, one thing remained remarkably unchanged. People kept living. Because humanity had always understood a painful truth. If fear controlled your final hours, then the enemy had already won. Within military installations hidden beneath mountains, buried beneath lunar regolith, and carved into the hollow interiors of asteroids, thousands of soldiers prepared for battle. Some wrote short messages to loved ones. Others quietly polished helmets already scratched by decades of service. Pilots climbed into fighters knowing they might never return. Engineers performed final diagnostics with hands that trembled only slightly. Everyone knew the statistics. No civilization had survived a United Council offensive. Not one. History offered no comforting stories. Only extinction. Even Earth's allies disappeared from the tactical display one by one. Trade partners severed communications. Neutral governments declared emergency isolation. Defense treaties quietly dissolved. Entire civilizations turned away, unwilling to provoke the Council's wrath by standing beside humanity during its final hours. The loneliness settled over human space like another form of gravity. Yet aboard the Resolute, something refused to break. Elena slowly looked around the bridge. No one was crying. No frantic shouting echoed through the command deck. No desperate arguments filled the air. Instead, officers moved with calm precision, checking systems they had practiced operating since the beginning of their careers. Engineers smiled faintly as they activated classified protocols hidden beneath layers of civilian software. Navigation crews exchanged confident nods instead of frightened looks. It wasn't denial. It wasn't blind optimism. It was expectation. As though every person aboard already knew this exact moment had been inevitable. A young communications officer finally broke the silence. They're charging primary weapons. Outside the observation window, distant stars vanished behind the impossible silhouettes of enemy dreadnoughts. Along the horizon of space, millions of weapon ports ignited together, forming rivers of crimson light stretching farther than human eyes could follow. The Council believed it was witnessing the final moments before humanity collapsed. But Elena's expression never changed. She watched the advancing armada with quiet patience. Then, almost too softly for anyone to hear, she whispered to herself. Just a little closer. The bridge remained silent. Because every human aboard understood something the galaxy did not. The invasion had begun exactly according to plan. The Galaxy Council believed the battle had already been won. Their fleets had surrounded the solar system with mathematical perfection, cutting off every escape vector, every reinforcement route, every conceivable avenue of survival. Across thousands of command bridges, admirals smiled as countdown timers approached zero. One coordinated volley. One overwhelming strike. That was all it would take to erase humanity from history. Tactical officers reported flawless positioning. Artificial intelligences predicted a victory probability exceeding 99.9%. The Council's oldest generals congratulated one another before the first weapon had even fired. To them, Earth was no longer an opponent. It was simply another lesson to the galaxy about the price of defiance. Then the countdown reached zero. Nothing happened. No missiles launched. No energy lances crossed the darkness. Instead, every display aboard every Council vessel flickered violently. For a heartbeat, the stars themselves seemed to freeze. Command crews frowned in confusion as hyperspace sensors produced impossible readings. Gravity fields that had remained constant for billions of years suddenly fluctuated by fractions too small to notice, yet too precise to be natural. Navigation computers issued contradictory warnings before shutting themselves down entirely. Internal chronometers drifted out of synchronization. Even light appeared wrong. It bent through space in unfamiliar angles, casting strange shadows across command decks that should never have existed. "What is interfering with our systems?" demanded one Council admiral. No one answered. Because no one understood what they were seeing. Far beneath the peaceful surface of human civilization, hidden inside abandoned mining worlds, beneath frozen moons, within hollowed asteroids, and even buried beneath Earth's own oceans, something ancient in design, but unmistakably human in imagination, finally awakened. Project Horizon. For decades, alien intelligence agencies had searched endlessly for Earth's secret superweapon. They expected a larger fleet. A more powerful bomb. Some impossible energy cannon hidden inside the moon. They searched for weapons. They never searched for infrastructure. Generation after generation of human scientists had quietly constructed an invisible web of quantum gravity anchors stretching across hundreds of light years. Each installation appeared harmless on its own, a scientific observatory, a communications relay, a mining reactor, an experimental power station. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they formed the largest machine ever created by intelligent life. Commander Elena Hayes stood silently aboard the Resolute as one by one, green indicators illuminated across the tactical display. Anchor 1. Online. Anchor 47. Online. Anchor 912. Online. Within seconds, millions of synchronized quantum nodes awakened beneath normal space, linking together through dimensions no species had ever successfully engineered. Synchronization complete, the ship's artificial intelligence announced calmly. Project Horizon at 100%. Elena inhaled slowly. Years of preparation. Millions of lives dedicated to secrecy. Entire generations carrying a burden they could never explain. Everything had led to this single moment. She placed her hand gently against the command console. Execute. The universe answered. No explosion erupted. No blinding flash illuminated the battlefield. Instead, reality itself seemed to breathe. An invisible wave expanded silently across the solar system. Space folded with elegant precision, not violently, but gracefully, as though an unseen hand had reached into the fabric of existence and gently rearranged its threads. Council dreadnoughts suddenly drifted sideways despite engines firing at full power. Carrier groups lost formation as gravity stopped obeying predictable mathematics. Hyperspace corridors collapsed like extinguished tunnels of light. Weapons refused to charge. Artificial singularities stabilized into harmless spheres. Entire fleets found themselves suspended inside pockets of altered spacetime where momentum no longer followed familiar laws. Panic spread faster than any weapon. Bridge officers shouted contradictory reports. Our engines are responding but we're not moving. Targeting systems have lost causality. We can't establish hyperspace. The stars are changing position. They weren't. The battlefield was. Human ships moved effortlessly through the distortion, following pathways calculated years before the first alien fleet had entered the trap. To Council commanders, it looked like magic. To humanity, it was simply physics understood from a different perspective. For the first time in 10 million years, the Galaxy Council discovered what it felt like to become completely powerless. And as millions of enemy warships drifted helplessly inside the invisible prison surrounding Earth, Commander Elena Hayes allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The Council had come expecting to conquer a planet. Instead, it had flown directly into humanity's masterpiece. The battlefield should have become a graveyard. Every prediction made by the Galaxy Council expected humanity to seize its advantage and unleash annihilation upon the immobilized invasion fleet. Millions of enemy warships hung motionless inside Project Horizon's invisible gravitational lattice, unable to accelerate, unable to fire, unable even to retreat. Their once proud armada had become a silent forest of steel suspended against the stars. One command from Earth could have transformed the darkness into an ocean of burning wreckage. Human captains knew it. Alien commanders knew it. The entire galaxy waited for the inevitable act of revenge. But the order never came. Instead, the Resolute accelerated gently through the frozen battlefield, followed by hundreds of sleek human cruisers whose engines left ribbons of silver light weaving between helpless dreadnoughts. They moved with remarkable precision, avoiding unnecessary damage as if navigating through a crowded harbor instead of the largest trapped invasion force in galactic history. Boarding craft detached from their carriers in disciplined formations, not carrying demolition charges, but emergency medical teams, engineers, and security personnel trained to secure ships without slaughtering their crews. Confusion spread faster than fear. Council officers stared in disbelief as human soldiers entered disabled vessels with weapons lowered. Instead of executions, they found medics stabilizing wounded engineers who had been injured when their own reactors overloaded during Project Horizon's activation. Fire suppression drones bearing the insignia of Earth floated through smoke-filled corridors, extinguishing blazes that threatened both alien and human lives alike. Water, oxygen, food supplies, and emergency power cells were transferred to enemy ships that only hours earlier had intended to erase humanity from existence. One elderly alien captain watched silently as a young human medic carefully treated burns across the arm of one of his officers. Finally, unable to understand what he was witnessing, he whispered, "Why?" The medic looked up briefly before returning to her work. Because saving lives is faster than replacing them. The simple answer echoed through the ship more powerfully than any speech. Across the battlefield, countless similar moments unfolded. Human engineers restored failing life support systems aboard crippled Council carriers. Rescue teams evacuated trapped civilians serving within logistics fleets. Children traveling with diplomatic convoys, never expected to witness combat, were escorted safely onto protected humanitarian vessels. Cameras recorded every act, transmitting them across the galaxy in real time. For civilizations raised on conquest, compassion became incomprehensible. Aboard the Resolute, Commander Elena Hayes stood before a galaxy-wide transmission array. Every surviving Council flagship, every civilian network, every neutral government, every hidden listening station received the same live broadcast. Behind Elena stretched the impossible sight of millions of immobilized warships, untouched despite their complete vulnerability. She remained silent for several moments, allowing the image itself to speak. Then she began. "You believed fear creates peace." Her voice was calm, carrying effortlessly across countless worlds. "You believed overwhelming power gives you the right to decide which civilizations deserve to exist." She paused, her eyes never leaving the camera. "You came here expecting monsters." The tactical display behind her shifted, revealing human rescue ships assisting stranded enemy crews. "You found humans instead." Silence followed. No dramatic music. No celebration. Only the quiet reality unfolding across the stars. Entire Council command staffs lowered their eyes. Veteran admirals who had commanded wars for centuries found themselves unable to answer. Because every lesson they had built their civilization upon had just collapsed. Humanity had demonstrated absolute military superiority. Yet it had refused absolute vengeance. That contradiction shook the galaxy more deeply than victory itself. Project Horizon had trapped the greatest armada ever assembled. But humanity's greatest weapon had never been its technology. It was the choice made after winning. As rescue operations continued beneath the light of distant suns, the stars seemed strangely brighter than before. Not because the war had ended. But because, for the first time in millions of years, the galaxy witnessed a civilization powerful enough to conquer. And wise enough not to. The war ended not with the thunder of collapsing fleets, but with a silence that echoed across the galaxy louder than any weapon ever fired. 7 days after the Galaxy Council had declared humanity's extinction, the same delegates returned to the Hall of Judgment, the colossal chamber carved from the heart of a dead star that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Yet nothing about the room felt the same. The towering banners of victorious empires no longer inspired awe. The polished obsidian floor reflected faces marked not by pride, but by disbelief. The seats once occupied by confident conquerors now held leaders who had looked into the abyss of absolute defeat, and discovered mercy waiting there instead. Every conversation was hushed. Every movement carried the weight of history. For the first time in millions of years, the Council convened not to decide the fate of another species, but to confront the collapse of its own certainty. Outside the station's immense observation dome, the immobilized invasion fleet had already been released from Project Horizon's gravitational lattice. Human engineers had restored navigation systems before allowing every surviving vessel to return home under its own power. There were no victory parades. No captured flags displayed as trophies. No demands for tribute or occupied worlds. Across thousands of sectors, alien crews returned to their families carrying stories no one had expected to hear. They spoke of human medics who had saved wounded enemies before treating their own. They remembered engineers who repaired damaged life support systems aboard hostile ships without asking for anything in return. They described children from Earth waving goodbye to soldiers who had arrived intending to destroy their world. Those stories spread faster than official reports. In crowded marketplaces, aboard freight stations, inside universities, military academies, and remote frontier colonies, whispers became conversations, and conversations became something even more dangerous to an empire built on fear. Hope. Commander Elena Hayes entered the council chamber without an escort, without ceremonial armor, and without the arrogance of a conqueror. She wore the same dark naval uniform she had worn throughout the conflict, still marked with the faint scratches and burn marks earned during the long days of preparation. As she walked across the vast circular floor, thousands of alien eyes followed her every step. Some watched with admiration. Others with shame. A few with lingering suspicion. Elena acknowledged none of them. Her attention remained fixed on the enormous holographic star map suspended above the chamber. For centuries, it had displayed territorial borders in bright colors, dividing the galaxy into competing spheres of influence. Today, for the first time, those borders were gone. The stars shone without lines separating them. The High Chancellor slowly rose from his ancient throne, his voice noticeably quieter than during the declaration of war only days before. The Galaxy Council withdraws all hostilities. His words echoed through the chamber. We recognize the sovereignty of Earth and every human colony. Another pause. We also recognize that strength without wisdom leads only to endless ruin. No applause followed. Only silence. Because every delegate understood the true meaning hidden within that statement. The Council had not merely lost a battle. It had lost the philosophy that had governed the galaxy for 10 million years. New treaties were drafted before the session ended. Military expansion programs were dismantled. Resources once devoted to planetary conquest were redirected toward scientific cooperation, reconstruction, and exploration. Human universities opened their laboratories to former enemies. Alien engineers collaborated with Earth's physicists to study the impossible mathematics behind Project Horizon, not to recreate it as a weapon, but to use its discoveries to build safer interstellar travel. Worlds that had once feared one another began exchanging students, artists, doctors, and explorers instead of soldiers. Slowly, almost cautiously, the galaxy began learning a lesson humanity had carried since long before it reached the stars: peace built through understanding lasts longer than peace enforced through fear. Years later, children across countless civilizations gathered in classrooms beneath unfamiliar skies, listening as teachers retold the story that had forever divided history into a before and an after. They did not call it the Great Galactic War. They called it the day humanity asked, "Is that all?" For ordinary words that had become a timeless reminder that courage is quiet, confidence does not need to shout, and true greatness is measured not by the enemies you destroy, but by the future you choose to protect. As Earth watched another sunrise spill golden light across its oceans, the stars above seemed less like distant frontiers and more like neighbors waiting to be known. And somewhere, carried silently through the endless darkness between galaxies, one enduring truth continued to echo. Never mistake kindness for weakness. Because when humanity finally stands its ground, even the universe learns the meaning of hope.